I'm going to do something I've not done before, which is an underwater miniature. Now don't get too excited, I'm not casting resin or anything in this video. Now, this model is from Reaper Miniatures. I don't know a lot about Reaper Miniatures, I just like the model. I like the opportunity to play about with some new materials and some slightly different techniques to what I normally do. This is my first go at a resin model. The biggest problem I had was that things were bent. So when I first got this, I had to dunk him in some warm water, straighten out parts and hold them in place so they straightened out. I cannot get this harpoon to stay straight. It keeps just twisting. So that's just something I'm going to have to live with. For the base, I went to our local aquarium shop and picked up some of their cheap scenery stuff. It's a good scale for what I want, and I'm probably going to paint it so it probably won't stay looking like this. On the base, I gave this a try. I've never used it before. It's a bit odd. It's very fine, but I wanted a very sort of fine, sort of tropical seabed kind of a look. And it's clear, which was a bit surprising. I thought it would be white, but it dries completely clear. You can see that you can sculpt it a little bit when you put it on. I was just going to get some regular sand and PVA glue and do it that way, but we're trying new things. Speaking of, I also picked up this iridescent medium, which I have used iridescent mediums before. This one's a lot coarser than I'm used to. The ones I've used before are much more pearlescent. This one's a bit more on the glittery side. But I think for this model, that's going to work okay. And I've got all of my paints out. A lot of people use different kinds of paints. I primarily use Citadel, but their pots are hot garbage. And so I have decanted them recently into these glass dropper pots, which are very nice to use, very comfortable in the hand. They're not without their faults. Being a screw top, they can get a bit stuck sometimes, but other than that, they seem to be doing the trick. See if I can get this camera set up, and let's see if I can show you me actually working on the model. I think I've finally figured out how to do it. Right, I'm hoping this works. I won't know what you can see until after I've looked at the video. Bit of a gamble. I'm using a white base coat because I want this very bright. So we shall start off with the base of Rhinox Hide. The paint that I've got is already slightly thinned in these jars, so I don't really need to thin it down. Now, I already know that I want the tail and the fins to fade out from quite a dark sort of coppery colour out to quite a bright silver. And to do that, I need a decent gold base for the silver and a very dark brown base for the coppery parts. Oh, this makes him look like he's made of chocolate. Not in a good way. Ew, fish chocolate. Ew. I don't think I'm glad I thought about that. We just do that for the various bits I need to do it on. All the fins marked out now. I was going to do, there's like a ridge down his back. I was going to do that in the gold as well, but I don't think that will work. Now, I know I want these scales in the base coat of a very bright silver. So before I do that, I need to use a base coat of black. So we shall use Abaddon Black, which is just black, and crack on with that. Now, I'm not going to worry about using a contrast medium here because, well, there's not really a great deal of point. But I am using just a little bit of water in my brush as I go. It just helps the Abaddon Black flow a little bit better. Helps if I can show you on camera as well. Sorry about this, I'm still getting used to holding things in frame for you. I usually use them quite close to my face. If only I put some sort of guide in front of the camera so I knew where to hold things. Now the little bit of water trick. All I'm doing is just dipping the very point of the brush in my water, which once I've done all the base coats I will likely change because these are very dark colours, and as I say, it just helps it flow because these scales are fairly deep, but I didn't want to wait for the contrast medium to dry. It can take quite a while. I'm not using a model holder for this either. I do sometimes, but this one doesn't really need it, and I think it would make it more awkward because it's already so tall and narrow. I can hold on to the base quite well, so it's not really necessary. While I wait for this black to dry, it does sometimes take a while. You can see I've got the little bit of scales that run up his spine there. I'm going to do his shoulder shell with Emperor's Children. That's a very classic thing, a merman with shell armour. I don't know, I like this model, it's kind of kitschy. And that should make a bit more sense when I get the shading on there. Still haven't decided on his skin tone yet. For the hair base, I'm going to use some Averland Sunset. I really like this colour, actually. It's very, very versatile. Yep, that's a reasonable base. It's funny, the base coats always look terrible. They always look kind of amateurish. I think I'm going to go with Knight-Questor Flesh for the skin tone base. Also, you'll notice I'm using layers as base colours and that sort of thing. As far as I use the paints, whether it's a base or a layer tells me how well it's going to cover, because they can all be thinned down to the same sort of consistencies. And if a layer doesn't go in one layer, then you just put another layer on. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, this should be an interesting base colour. Do interesting things with washes over this one. I do wash my brush out quite regularly when I'm doing base coats. I don't know why, but the brush always seems to clog up a lot faster on a base coat than on a later layer coat. Could just be because of the amount of area that you're covering, I'm not certain. Passable. Not decided on colour for his straps or his collar yet. I can come back and do those later. Now the black is dry, I can get the metallics on. Base colours for the metallics are Brass Scorpion and Stormhost Silver, which is really, really bright, which is just what I want. I'm going to start with silver because it's easier to go over than the brass. And I'm not worrying about being too accurate here. I don't mind if the coverage isn't even on these scales. That might actually add to what I have in mind. There's all of our silver on. Now for the brass. I like using this colour over a brown base rather than a black base, because it makes the metallic a little bit richer. You can, with metallics, play about with your primer layer and get different kinds of colours showing through. The only problem with the Citadel metallics really these days is their coverage is really very good, and ideally you want ones that aren't quite as good. So you might be better off with something like Army Painter, where their metallics are a little bit thinner. Some of the Vallejo paints also are a little bit thinner, and it can just allow the primer layer to show through. I think that will do for now. Metallics just need a little bit of time to dry, and then I can move on to the next stage. Well done me, I forgot to press record. I have used Agrax Earthshade and Carroburg Crimson, both Citadel washes, and we've done the hair, the body and the brass fins and his tail in the Agrax Earthshade, and then the Carroburg Crimson all over the silver scales and his little pink seashell up there. I just have to wait for this to dry, and once that has, I can move on to the next stage. I had a look back through the video I'd recorded, and yeah, wasn't really thrilled with the camera angle, so I've had a bit of a change, see if this works a bit better. Do bear with me. All the washes are now nice and dry, so I can move on to the highlighting stage. This is where it starts actually looking like something. So we're going back to Stormhost Silver to begin with, because I want the front of the scales, like an actual fish, to be very pale and a lot of the colour to be on the back. So it's sort of like dry brushing, but not. You don't make the paint quite as dry, and you sort of use the side of the brush, because I want the scales to be slightly textured. You just build up your layers very gradually. Until you get the colour that you're after. It is very, very shiny on camera. It's a little bit tricky to film. Maybe going with quite so many glittery paints was a bad idea. I think we should go with Moot Green. A bit more Emperor's Children, which it's a fantastic pink. I love this pink. And some Temple Guard Blue. I am literally making this up as I go along at this point. Same technique again. Load a little bit of paint on your brush and then just drag it across the scales where you want it. Because I sort of want to tint the scales, but I don't want to put a wash over what's already there. I actually want to have the existing colour show through. Like I say, this is experimental, so it's not something I've tried before, it's just some theory I'm putting into practice. And I do want some stripes. So I pick out a rough area that I want. And you can see the stripes appearing there as we work along. I'm just going to bring them a little bit around the front. Don't want to have a very kind of rigid line. I want these to sort of blend in a bit like a softened blurred edge rather than a very crisp stripe. The one exception being as we get nearer the tail tip, they'll look more like a solid stripe because there's just less space. And there we are, that's the first of the blue stripes in, but we still have the silver and the pink showing through underneath, which gives us that nice depth. So now I'll put the next stripes on. And of course around the front of the fish portion is much paler, it's almost completely silver. With the Moot Green, I'm just going to go underneath the blue in a much smaller area. And the Moot Green's actually, it covers a lot better than the blue that I've just used. And that's all we need for the green. Tiniest bit of Emperor's Children. I'm only just using this to take off the edge on the silvery bits. It's quite subtle. So it just takes that really high point shine off. And now I'll do the little shell at the top there. I'm going to blend some Karak Stone in with the pink. So I want to keep that sort of natural material look. I don't want this to look like a plastic pound shop shell. I want it to look like an actual shell. So I'm avoiding using pure white. After the Karak Stone, a little bit of Screaming Skull. Rather than blending this with Karak Stone, I'm going to blend that straight with the pink, which should give us a nice warm hue, like so. Back to Averland Sunset for the hair. I'm using pretty much the same technique throughout here. This is the way that I've painted for years and years, where you put a very tiny amount on the brush, and then on details like this you use the side of the brush just to stroke along the high points, because I don't want any blends here particularly. I do want quite sharp changes in the tones because of the textures I'm working with. This is leaving some of the Iridescent Medium behind. It's not covering all of it, so as I build up the layers I can apply more of that, paint over it, whatever suits. And we should end up with a nice depth of texture. I put rather more on there than I needed. On the palette, that is. Oh well. And then we'll take some Screaming Skull, mix that in. Again, rather than white, I don't want to go very bright on these highlights. I want to bring it up gradually, and I want to go for a more sort of natural blonde, if I can. Blonde hair is probably one of the hardest hair colours to get right, and I frequently can't, because it's not the colour you think it is. It's not actually like a very bright straw yellow. It's usually much more sort of beiges and browns. But everything on this guy is going to be a little bit exaggerated, so I don't mind if this doesn't look like real blonde hair. I just want it to look blonde yellow-ish, that sort of end of the spectrum. There we go, that's not too bad. That's pretty close to the colour I wanted. That's his little shoulder pad shell. And you can see the stripes there. I'm going to add just a bit more to that. There's a little bit more I'd like to do. But before I add any more colour to his scales, I want to do the fins, because that will dictate what I do here. I want to be able to balance out the colour choices. To begin, we're back with Brass Scorpion here. And the key thing that you change when you do this, because I want these to fade out into a paler colour, is as you get to the end, ignore what's happened with the wash and just paint it flat. And then only highlight towards the top. Every time you do it, you just paint more solid. This will make more sense as I go along. But this helps give you the illusion that this is less solid. So it should make it look a bit more like a fishtail, where they're sort of see-through. And you sort of let the brush do the work for you, because the brush, if you've got to force it to go down into the folds and crevices, then you've gone too far. It's like the very deep areas there, I'm leaving those alone. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to pull out these stripe colours, the blue and the green, into the fins before I start highlighting any further. So it's just quite a messy highlight this. It's more about getting the colour tone where I want it than it is making a solid colour. There may be other ways of doing this that I'm not aware of. Remember, this is an experiment, so I'm just seeing what works and what doesn't as I go along. You do want to be experimenting every now and then, because sometimes you find quicker ways of doing things. That's always useful. Right, I like that. Let's put some green in. And I'm not completely covering the brass colour. I'm leaving quite a lot of it to show through. I actually want this flat colour I'm doing to be quite patchy, so it looks a bit more organic. It's funny as well, in my head I had a very different image of what this was going to end up looking like, so that's quite fun to learn as I go. Okay, I'm not going to use any of the pink. I want to keep the pink restricted to the main tail, but I like that those fins now tie in a bit better with the rest. Next colour of choice, Auric Armour Gold. This gold is fantastic, I like it a lot. And now we sort of cover up everything we've just done with the colours. Because what should happen is this is a thinner metallic, and those greens and blues will show through it as I highlight. You can see here where I've just started doing the highlight on those side fins that the blue and the gold do work together. One doesn't kill the other, and that's exactly what I want. And you build your layers up gradually until you get the sort of finish that you're after. If you have too much of one colour, you can go back and just apply another layer and balance it. So it's interesting to see how it's working on here. Yep, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to use just a little bit on the back. Barely any. And I'm going to follow where the light would fall. And again, this should help tie in what I'm doing on the fins with what's going on with the rest of his body. There we go. You can see how those colours all show through. A bit more Stormhost Silver. Just treat this like an ordinary highlight on all of our edges. Again, the goal here really is to get the edges to catch the light, and then all of these different colours that we've got in here, you'll see them, but you don't have to put lots of effort in to make them stand out. So it just ties everything together, makes you aware that these are a lot of different colours without being confusing. Or such is the theory anyway. Just going to add a little bit more silver where the light catches on the front. So we can bring that up a bit. I think that's working okay. Barak-Nar Burgundy next. I want to put some fine detail markings in. I'm just painting in very fine stripes between each of the different colours. And I'm just going straight over the scale shapes. We don't need to worry about sticking to each individual scale. That's not how nature does it. We're starting to get there with the design now. So you can see that it just marks out those bands a little bit better. This makes the colours more obvious. Now we'll go back to the iridescent medium, and I'm just going to sort of apply this everywhere, but very lightly. I'm also going to apply it on his skin. I'm going to see whether or not this actually does anything, because I like to imagine that the iridescence of the scales would carry on through to the flesh, but we shall see how that works, because it might not, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. It might be too much. There's a bit much there, oh well. One thing I did learn about the iridescent medium is you can just paint over it straight away. It doesn't matter. And you can see that sometimes it's very, very bright when you look at the body there, and then it goes away. And it's new water time because the water is full of iridescent medium now. I think I'm happy with the fish portion of this. It's got just enough visual interest to look as I want. It's not what I was planning. I was planning something very different to this, but I'm okay with that. Back to Knight-Questor Flesh, and we're going to do his skin tones. I'm going to blend the skin tones through to Screaming Skull. A little bit of each paint, blend them together, and then work our way up through the various highlights till we get where we want. Well, I think that's okay so far. I've given him some base coats here, so we've got the burgundy on his straps, and then we've got the Rhinox Hide on the bits that are probably going to be metal.
I also did a little bit extra work on the skin tones off camera. I just needed to do it without the camera being here, just to tidy the blends up. Pretty much what you've seen on the screen here, just a little bit easier when you can do it close up. To highlight the straps, I'm going to blend the burgundy with some Screaming Skull. That should give me a nice highlight. I think the pauldron strap's a little bit plain. I'm going to add a little detail here. A few extra details put in. Painted the harpoon. Nothing fancy, so I didn't document it in detail. Tidied the face up. Tidied the scales up a little bit, and got the base colours on the last of the metallics here for the jewellery. I'm going to use some of the Citadel technical paints. I quite like using the red over a gold base. If you put it over silver, the red ends up looking quite washed out. Waystone Green is the other one. This goes well over silver and gold. Depends on the kind of green that you're after. As you can see with his bangles there, one is over a gold base and one is over a silver base, and you get two quite different greens as a result. And the third one is Soulstone Blue. This one works best over silver. And as you can see, it gives again another nice dual tone. The blue's probably the weakest of the set. Moved on a little bit now, tidied some bits and pieces up. These little plants here are just from an aquarium, and I've just glued those in, have a little bit more scenery work to do at the back. To take off the very plasticky sheen that they've got, I've given everything a very light coat of satin varnish, and then I can do some highlighting afterwards. I do want to just put a little bit more scenery at the back here to hide these stems, but I think we're pretty close to finished on this guy now.
All the paints that we used to do this model, we've got Spiritstone Red, Waystone Green, Soulstone Blue, Athonian Camoshade, Agrax Earthshade, Carroburg Crimson, Emperor's Children, Rhinox Hide, Brass Scorpion, Stormhost Silver, White Scar, Temple Guard Blue, Screaming Skull, Knight-Questor Flesh, Auric Armour Gold, Moot Green, Averland Sunset, Karak Stone, Barak-Nar Burgundy, Abaddon Black, and Iridescent Medium, which is an enormous pot, and I'll probably need to never buy another.